Hello and welcome to lecture number 4 tonight. So before we start, are there any questions from last week, or generally, if you've any questions, happy to answer them. Everyone is happy. Okay, very good. We had a few people send in their apologies today. They couldn't make it. So today, as I mentioned last week, we're going to talk more about some practical aspects of Zen. So I'd like to start off with basically some rituals, and also talk a little bit about some hindrances that we encounter when we start meditating, and that might be useful. So first of all, let's actually start with the hindrances. So when we start sitting on the cushion, what we usually encounter is a resistance. And I guess everyone that has been meditating has encountered that. And that resistance shows itself in many ways. Just remember that in the Zen tradition, remember that bucket analogy that I used in the first lecture. It's all about letting go. So we don't actually deal with the hindrances in a systematic, profound way. But nevertheless, I want to show you some classical categories of hindrances that have been over centuries that have been articulated, especially in various Buddhist traditions. So if you like the hindrances, I mean, there are many hindrances. I mean, you can probably countless amounts of hindrances that occur while we are sitting. But they can generally be categorized into some major areas, if you like, and I'll show you a slide for that. Come up. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here we have what is called the 5 hindrances and also the antidotes to those hindrances. So these are, again, as I said before, these are sort of basic ones that that are actually that come up in the canon, in sutras, principally from the Theravadan tradition. So one of the first hindrances, of course, is desire. So desire, we sit down on the cushion, desire comes up, and that desire is, of course, is huge. I mean, that desire can be a simple desire like moving our leg, or scratching our nose, or the desire to have a cup of tea, or the desire to all of a sudden meditate better. There are many desires that occur when we're meditating. And of course, what we tend to do is we tend to then engage with those desires, and that engagement then takes us away from our meditation. The and sometimes those desires can be very powerful, and it's not easy just simply to ignore them. Okay, so let me first talk about the way we do it in Zen. In Zen, the actual practice is to swap the desire for the object of meditation. So you have an object of meditation which might be counting or mooing. A desire comes up. If you are aware that a desire has arisen, you're already halfway there. In other words, mindfulness has kicked in, and you're noticing that you are no longer concentrating on the object of meditation. That is already an advanced step, if you like. Quite often, that step doesn't even know, that awareness is not even there. You go straight into the desire, and then you just deal with that desire, or you engage in discursive thinking, if you like, or discrimination, or in daydreaming about it. You might have a desire to win the lotto, and all of a sudden you start dreaming about what it would be like to have $1 million. And all of a sudden we get into these daydreams, and we start daydreaming about how our life could be versus the way it is. These are all typical forms of craving and desires. So if mindfulness is strong enough, and you realize that what you're doing, you're already halfway there. Then it's a matter of recognizing, what are you feeding with your mind? Are you feeding your object of meditation, or are you feeding your desire? If you're feeding your object of meditation, then that wins. and you come back, you go back on track. If you're feeding your desire, if the desire is strong enough, then there's nothing you can do about it. Then you fall back into it unless mindfulness kicks in again, or the awareness kicks in again, if you like, that's what you're doing, and that process starts again. So here the idea is almost to give yourself a talking to and say, no, hang on a second, this is Arno, pull yourself together. You need to concentrate. And quite often that is sufficient if we are serious, and if we're serious about our meditation, if we are alert enough, if our intention is strong, and if we bring a certain, I'll talk about that a little bit later, if we bring a certain discipline into the whole structure of our sitting, then that is already sufficient. But sometimes the desire is just too overwhelming. And when it is too overwhelming, there are other antidotes that we can do. We can start, for instance, breaking it apart. And what we are breaking apart here is the story that we're getting involved in. So for instance, we might have some discursive thinking happening, and we can start labeling the thoughts. We can label the thoughts into past, present, and future, for instance. Or we can label the thoughts into, or this is work, or this is family, or we can have certain categories that we can make up. And so what we're doing basically is a desire or a thought comes up, and we just dump it into another bucket. And what that does is it breaks up, if you like, it breaks up that linkage of the thoughts into a story. A nice analogy about that is, it's like when that happens to you, when you feel like, oh, just there's no way that you can concentrate right now. Your mind is everywhere, and this typically happens when we come cold turkey into our practice, meaning that you might come from work and your mind is racing, and all of a sudden you're expected to all of a sudden have full concentration. It just doesn't work that way. Sometimes we need to almost have a warm-up exercise. We need to be relaxed to a certain degree, if you like, in order to get to those deeper stages of concentration. So here the tactic is, or one of the antidotes is to start dealing with it in a skillful way, and one of which is start labeling what is actually happening in your mind, categorizing it, and thereby taking it apart and not engaging. That's sort of a technique not to engage. You engage to some degree, but not sufficiently to get lost in the thought stream. You still have some control over it. The idea here is, the analogy that is quite often used is like a cat. Those of you that have ever watched a cat looking for a mouse, it's like, so if you look at a cat sits in front of a hole, for instance, and just waits. Seen a mouse go, say, under the fridge, and it's fixated and it waits for the mouse to appear. And that's a nice analogy. It's like, in a way, we can do that too. So if our discursive thinking is really strong, or desires, if you like, or craving is really strong for something, we can just all of a sudden wait for it to appear. Deliberately, in other words, we are making it the object of meditation. We're making actually our desire or our craving or our discursive thinking the object of our meditation. So in that instance, you would just wait for it to come, label it, put it in a bucket, and wait for the next one to come. And the idea here is that by doing so, we are breaking it apart and we're not engaging. We're not engaging in a link or in a storyline about it. And pretty soon, because we're not engaging, those thoughts will, we might be aware of it, but pretty soon we will relax into that, and it will dissipate. And when that happens, we then can come back to our counting or come back to our moving. So that's one way we can look at that. So that's just on desire or craving. The other one is doubt. Doubt may arise. Okay, so that might be, why am I doing this? What am I sitting here for? Gosh, I mean, this is so much effort. Is it really worth it? All of a sudden there's this huge amount of doubt that can arise. That's another typical hindrance that may arise. I don't want to talk too much about that right now because there's a whole session on that next week about doubt and how to deal with doubt. So I'll just skip that a little bit for now. But usually, what you do when doubt comes along, you talk about it with your meditation teacher. The other one is aversion and ill will. That's a big one too for some people. For some people, it may not be an issue. Aversion and ill will. You might come and meditate, and all of a sudden an incident that may have happened at work, and you might feel aggrieved about that. And that's usually relating to relationships or someone. Might be a family member, a work colleague. It might be someone that cut you off in the traffic. And that can be extremely powerful. When that happens, we tend to fixate as well. And of course, it can be related to all sorts of things. That may be, especially when jealousy comes into it, or when we feel like that, a wrong has been done to us, and no one is listening to us. That goes into all sorts of areas. And that can be extremely powerful. Again, in the Zen tradition, we would, swap that for our object of concentration. We just put that aside for a moment. So if it becomes too dysfunctional, in other words, if our meditation becomes too dysfunctional, then we might need to address that. And traditionally, that is addressed with a loving kindness meditation. Again, not easy. The Theravadan, I must say, the Theravadan tradition is much stronger on that than in the Zen tradition. The Zen tradition is basically pushes that aside, and the idea here is you substitute whatever is occurring with the object of meditation. So you put that temporarily aside. You might want to deal with your aversion or your ill will at a later stage after the meditation. It's just like you might want to have a cup of tea after the meditation, but during the meditation, you just push that aside for a moment. But there are antidotes to that as well. I won't go too much into loving kindness meditation right now. That is a completely different meditation, but it's basically wishing whoever it is that you have ill will towards loving kindness. And again, not easy, especially if those relationships are complicated. And quite often, also the loving kindness that is required is for ourselves, because quite often we blame ourselves, and we get into this mind state where we take certain aspects on, and it's not easy. It affects our self-image. But again, that's more of a therapy. I would suggest more of a therapeutic application. And again, as I said, in the Zen tradition, we don't go into that too much, except we always come back to. With all of these things in the Zen tradition, you always come back to, if it's in the bucket, you don't deal with it. You don't reject it, by the way. It's not a matter of not rejecting it. You let it be. You look at it, whatever it's happening. You might even label it. You might recognize it, but you let it go. It arises, and as we all know, everything arises and everything ceases. It's just a matter of time. So to what, if you give it energy, if you feed it, you are feeding it. In other words, it will grow. It'll go into a different dimension. So the idea is not to feed it, as far as the meditation is concerned. You just let it go by its own accord, in its own way. And the way to let it go is by concentrating on something else, which is your object of meditation. Mental and physical sluggishness is another big one. And quite frankly, nowadays, the more I talk to people, I always say, well, go and get some sleep. I mean, there's just so many people squeeze in meditation where really they should really have a good sleep. We have such busy lives that you really need to look at that. If meditation is like a last resort, in the sense that you really sort of put in, you're having a really busy week, and you just stretch that meditation in so that maybe you can cope better. And you're really tired at it, maybe sometimes you should question that and say, well, if I'm really that tired, maybe sleep is a better way. But generally, if it's manageable, and of course we get physically sluggish, and we lose mental energy, then again, it's a matter of having a talking to ourselves, maybe getting up and putting some cold water on, having a walk outside in the fresh air. There's various ways that we can address that, and to get back into meditation. It's also quite often, as I said before, it's important that meditation is not seen as just that I do that little bit of meditation in order sort of to have a better day. Meditation in many ways, it's a matter of how do you prioritize it. What priority do you give to your meditation? So that's another way of looking at it. The other one is agitation and restlessness. That's a big one. That falls also into that category of daydreaming to some degree, but agitation and restlessness is that, especially right now, like we've just had this rain. And to give you one example, and I was sitting the other day and I felt restless. I mean, it's just like this, even though I have a dry roof and everything is fine, but there is this, there's things happening outside, and that affects us, whether it's COVID, whether it's the news, whether it's the rain or the storm, or agitation and restlessness in some way actually is part of our sitting. Again, when that happens here, then we focus on the object of meditation, and we substitute it without resisting it, and without pushing it away, and without engaging with it too much. So we don't. So in other words, all these things, from a Zen tradition, we don't analyze it. We don't look at it in an analytical way whatsoever. Coming back to that bucket analogy. Also, with agitation and restlessness, there may be underlying causes. We talked about I talked about that analogy about our, it's like a car with four wheels, like our body or a mind, like a car with four wheels, and they all need to be aligned. And agitation and restlessness is usually a sign that where one wheel is not aligned. And that could be our lifestyle, that could be many things. So that manifests itself, and that takes time. But again, we don't analyze it too much from a Zen point of view, but you may want to look at that, and it'll come up. Meditation has a great way of showing. It's almost like a mirror. All of a sudden, when we start sitting, these things show themselves in a much clearer way, and then we may want to address those things in our life, whatever that is, whether it is sluggishness, aversion, ill will, agitation, whatever it is, we may want to address that then at a later stage. Okay, so that's about the 5 hindrances and the antidotes. I just want to show you another slide before I open it up for a discussion. And that is basically this slide here, which what this shows is it shows you that there is some. It's like a pyramid, if you like. There's effort involved, and then there comes a point where the practice becomes effortless. So here, effort relates to dealing with the hindrances. So when we start meditating, in the beginning there is a lot of effort involved. For start time, then we're dealing with all those hindrances on the cushions, and those that have meditated, you will know all about that. I mean, there's just effort involved in simply focusing on our object of meditation, and that is like going up a hill. Going up a hill, there's effort involved. Eventually, the more we meditate and the more we concentrate, eventually we get to a point where the practice becomes effortless. And that's like going down that. So the image here is going down the hill. And if we go down the hill, we still might have hindrances, but they are much easier to overcome. They're much easier to bypass, if you like. And so eventually we get to a point where sitting is no longer an effort. Getting to the cushion. My teacher always used to say, the hardest part is getting to the cushion. And the second hardest part is staying on the cushion. This is I've always taken that home with me. The hardest part is getting to the cushion. The second hardest part is staying on the cushion. And staying on the cushion is like that effort, that effort that is involved. And in the beginning, of course, also getting to the cushion, there's effort involved. But eventually, it becomes part of our life. We do things right now that effortlessly, that maybe at one stage required effort. That might be jogging. You might have, it might have, or walking. You might have walked for, or swimming. Might have walked for a kilometer or swam for a kilometer, and that took a lot of effort. And eventually, after a while, it's part of your routine. You do it every day, and it's effortless. It's just part of what you do. And it's the same with meditation. Okay, so I'll just stop sharing that for a moment and just open it up to everyone and see if there are any questions or anyone wants to contribute something. Maybe how do you deal with it? Might be a good question at the moment. Or have you got any? Is there anything that maybe you're dealing with in your practice that I haven't mentioned? All good? Yes, Caitlin.
Yeah, I just have a quick question because I tend to get very restless
Yes.
myself. But how much of it do you find, I guess, from experience, can you overcome by just sitting? And how much do you feel like it would be beneficial to move and to like kind of release it out of your body beforehand?
Yes. So actually, a good point. So for some people, again, it's like a warm-up exercise is a very good idea. So beforehand, you might want to, for instance, do a walking meditation. We'll talk about walking meditation in a minute. For instance, just to release some energy. That is appropriate. Or you might even want to go for a jog if you feel that is what is required. So or you might do a ritual. Like reading the precepts or having a chant or listening to some music or doing a loving kindness meditation. One of the rituals that I personally like very much is that especially when I'm restless, is to think of things that I'm grateful for, because that shifts my mind state into a very wholesome space. So being restless, is if you like, being restless somehow is associated with some type of anxiety, and then just switching over to just making myself think of things to be grateful for shifts that. Then once I am in that space of being grateful, then I start my meditation, or then I got back to my meditation. So that's another way that you can do that. Um, the yeah, people have different strategies to deal with that.
Okay.
Yep. Just on that, by the way, from a Zen perspective, um, it's actually very simple. It's simply said, but it's not that easy to do. And that is like I gave a talk on that on Sunday actually. It's like in this particular koan, the master says, I'm not asking you before the 15th day. I'm not asking you after the 15th day. Meaning, I don't ask you, about your past, and I'm not asking you about the future. And that is really where we dwell. That is where we spend our time. I'm asking you right now what's happening. So, in other words, if we let go of the past and in the future, that's it. That is that space that we are inhabiting when we let go of the past and in the future. That's it. There's actually that is the whole project. There it is, right there. But of course, then our past and future and our concepts and all of it, how do we deal with that? And we relate it to something that happened, or something that we think that might happen, or something we read about, or something that is occurring that we then start analyzing. All of that gets in the way. Not dealing with things in the past or in the future and just honing in on mu, or honing in on counting, or on our awareness of our breath. That's the project. That's our practice. So it again sounds very easy, but I think the takeaway here is don't get too involved in analytics. Don't get too involved in thinking about it. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Of course, we just by default tend to do that. But the simplicity is key. Yeah. Any other points?
Arno, the loving
Yes.
kindness meditation that you mentioned, is that
Yes.
something that you'll be going through in this course, or?
No, it's not really part of the Zen tradition, that particular
Oh,
loving kindness. But again, if you, by the way, you can Google it. It's a very simple practice. It's a matter of starting with yourself, and then sort of extending that to some, it can be even animals, or eventually extending it to people that you have aversion towards, sort of to the point where you all of a sudden offer loving kindness to your sangha, in other words, to all, all beings. For some people, it's challenging, especially if you have difficult relationships with other people. That's why sometimes it's you start off with depending on, and again, that's where a teacher comes in, and you talk to a teacher about that. You may want to start with, depending on where you're at with loving kindness, you may want to start with something that is very familiar and that you have already a natural, and you're already naturally drawn to, like an animal or a pet. It's
Yeah.
very easy to give loving kindness to an animal, to a pet, and then slowly but surely maybe to then something else, eventually to yourself. For some people, that may be really challenging, even to give it to yourself, and or even then to other people. But it's an acquired, so Tibetan and also the Theravadan tradition go very much into that, not so much in Zen. Yeah. Also, I'm sure if you key it into Google, there's a lot of guided meditations as far as loving kindness meditations are concerned that you can avail yourself.
Yeah.
So,
Hey.
yep. Has anyone done a loving kindness meditation? Yep, yep. Daniel, I'm sure you would have. Yep.
I do it a lot with my clients as well.
You do it a lot with your clients, okay? So that's you would know the difficulty.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
As I said, starting with yourself as well, having compassion towards yourself and the difficulties that you're going through in the moment, or the difficulties of the distractedness or frustrating thoughts or things like that. So actually just starting there is often difficult enough.
Yes. I do it sometimes in prison with prisoners. Very difficult. Usually we start off with people. I get someone. We do it in a group. So I usually start off with people offering that to something or someone that they feel already some connection with. And slowly, gradually. It is more of a therapeutic application, and but of course very important, because in one way, we need to have a good, healthy relationship with ourselves in order to progress. If we're stuck there, we can easily bypass certain issues, and that causes its own issues. But as I said in the first introduction, in Zen, it almost presupposes that we have already a functional self-image. If our self-image is not functional, then Zen can be quite difficult. So that's that's something that you discuss with the teacher once. I'll talk more about the student-teacher relationship, how that functions next week. But that's something usually you would discuss with the teacher privately. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so that's good. So what I'd like to do now is talk about some rituals. And when I say rituals, yeah, actually they are rituals. First of all, what are rituals? It's the Zen tradition has rituals, probably the least amount of rituals of any Buddhist tradition. But nevertheless, there are rituals, and a lot of people struggle with rituals. Because they don't understand them, they feel whatever certain people, or the association regarding those rituals triggers something quite often. I know when I first started in Zen, I couldn't believe some of the rituals that we did. I thought they were crazy, and why would you even do them? So I struggled with that myself. So, but it took me a while actually to get to the point to realize what rituals actually are, and also what the purpose is of a ritual. Obviously we cannot live without rituals. We start having a ritual as soon as we get out of bed. whether that is the first ritual is going to the toilet or having a glass of water, or the ritual might be to have a cup of coffee and read the paper, or the ritual might be to run around because it's frantic and we've slept in and we rush to the shower in order to get to the bus. And so we all have rituals all day long. When we get to work, we have a ritual. What do we do first thing when we go to work? You'll find that we fall into certain rituals in our life all the time. Can't help it. We're creatures of, if you like, of rituals. We don't necessarily might look at them as rituals, but so I'm suggesting, or I'm inviting you to look at all of your life's habits, if you like, as a kind of rituals that we do. And so in Zen we have certain rituals, and they have also their functions. Okay, they have got their functions. So there are rules in a Zendo, and that has a function. The Zendo is the space where we all sit, and the rituals that we have there are manifold, many rituals. It starts off with putting the shoes neatly outside the Zendo in a dedicated space. I remember when I first went to Japan and did my first sesshin, my long retreat, the Japanese Roshi came in and he said, "I can see the state of your mind by the way you put your shoes out the front of the Zendo." He said, so everyone just put their shoes there in that was a real Japanese way of saying, straighten up and be serious. And actually, that had an impact on me because it's true. The way I enter the Zendo, or the way I approach my meditation space, the seriousness I take to it affects my entire practice. And that's the first ritual. And I go as far as saying, as soon as you drive to the Zendo, turn off the radio, concentrate on driving. Just really concentrate on driving. So our practice, we call our practice, or most people think practice is meditation. That's not our practice. Meditation is like drinking a cup of tea or going for a walk. That's just an activity, that we do. Our practice is our life. And unless we start looking at it from that perspective, and unless we take our concentration into our everyday functioning, in our everyday activity, it just becomes like a walk. For it to change, for the practice to have an effect on us. Remember the path is the goal. Every moment is the goal. Every moment is practice. So of course you got to start somewhere, and meditation is a good place to start. But Zazen means sitting meditation, but really Zazen is everything. Is like the way it is explained in Zen. Every activity we do is it. There is no separation between Zazen or cooking or drinking or sleeping or going to the toilet. All of our activity is one activity. It's seamless. It's a seamless practice. Okay. So the attention. You got to start somewhere. So look at your practice as in at least start off with, a good intention to start off with your sit, or when you go to your meditation space, putting your shoes neatly, in a certain space is already, if you like, it's a ritual, but it starts kicking in a process of, yes, I'm going to take this seriously, and yes, I'm going to be aware I'm going to make extra effort to be aware for the next 25 minutes for my sit. So it starts right there. We enter the Zendo, we do a gasho. This, of course, you may have seen that, this bow, if you like, this bow. Okay. So now this ritual here, we can assign meaning to this ritual. Okay. And so some people call it, that's an ego lowering exercise. You lower your ego. That's a meaning that we add to that ritual. Another meaning that we may assign to it, the duck and the rabbit coming together as one. So the middle path, if you like that phenomenal world, or the dualistic world and the non-dualistic worlds coming together. So that's my goal in many ways, to see that, to practice that, to there's another assigned meaning to that ritual. Okay. Another one is respect. There's usually a Buddha figure, so it's respect to the path, respect to the teacher, as in the Buddha, as in he was an ancient teacher. Respect to the lineage. That's another thing we assign to a ritual of gashowing. It might be a greeting. We might say, "Oh, this is a lovely greeting. A greeting to, I'm really," or a sign of gratefulness. I'm here. Or a mindfulness. This is where now I'm going to really focus on it. So the point here is that there are many, many, many meanings that we assign to rituals. But of course, as you would know, in Zen, there is no meaning at all. If you can see what is this without the meaning, now you're getting closer to where Zen is going. But of course, that is very difficult. That's like you need to disappear to actually see what this means. As in meaning. What this means, I should say. What does this mean? Can I let go of assigning anything to this? When you have a ritual, and this is when I finally got that. That was a big thing for me. It's like all of a sudden, when a ritual triggered me, like prostration is another one, which is we do a full prostration at the end of a sesshin, or at the end of a sit, meaning you get on the floor. And when I first saw it, I thought, oh, this is like what the Muslims do. I was horrified when I saw this, and it really triggered me. And I came from a Catholic background, and all these rituals stuff I disliked immensely. So all of this stuff triggered me. But eventually I got to the point where I saw, yes, the reason it triggers me is because I have not let go. I've not let go of the story. I haven't let go. I was not free. Actually, I was not free. I could not do something because I wasn't free. And when I got that finally, then that was a big realization. To what degree am I free to do it? I'm just sharing that with you so that you can get some perspective on on these rituals. So there's number one, we assign meaning, and then two, look beyond the meaning into the purity of it. What's the difference between this, which might be drinking a cup of tea, or looking at my watch and going like that? They're just movements. But of course, but again, we have a meaning. Oh, he's looking at his watch. The next thing you might say, oh, he's bored because he's looking at his watch. Or, oh, we must be coming close to the end because he's looking at his watch. We assign things, and we automatically start thinking about certain things, about certain actions. And it's the same with rituals. And so rituals are very powerful. They're very, very powerful if you can, if you have some awareness about them, and especially if they trigger us. Anything that triggers us is an avenue for growth. It's an avenue to look at what is it that triggers me? Why is it triggering me? And it's a way of engaging and somehow also a motivation kicks in, certainly with myself, to be free of that, whatever that is triggering me. Okay, so coming back to the Zendo, we do a gasho when we get in. Then you see 2 rows of seats. I won't go too much into that because we're not in a Zendo right now, but when you come, or if you come to a Zendo, I'll happily go over that with you again in person. We're starting to sit again tomorrow in Spring Hill, tomorrow evening. Every Thursday now, hopefully. So if any of you want to come, then I'll go over those rituals with you in more detail again, or show you actually physically what I mean by those. But usually you have 2 rows of seats, sometimes 3 or 4 rows of seats. We find a spot, we go to the cushion, we gasho to the wall, if you like, but that usually the meaning here is we say hello to our neighbors, we turn around, everything is always done in a clockwise fashion, and when we gasho to everyone else, this is the gasho, remember, in other words, we're greeting the whole community, and then we start sitting. Then the next ritual is we have clappers, the clappers go, and that's usually a signal that in a minute or so, we're starting the meditation process. And that's usually when you start, getting yourself ready. Okay. You get yourself ready on the cushion or the chair or the meditation stool. After everyone has settled in to some degree, then the gong goes 3 times. 3 times for sitting, 2 times for walking meditation, and once when the whole evening finishes. This is the ritual. And then we have our first practice, which was 25 minutes of sitting. After 25 minutes, the gong goes twice. Everyone checks. First of all, remember always to check whether you, especially if you sit cross-legged, whether your feet have not fallen asleep. If they have, you may not necessarily want to get up very quickly. So make sure everything is functioning all right before you get up. Don't get up too quickly. We get up, turn around, and we do a walking meditation. So everyone waits, standing there facing each other. The clappers go. We put our hand against our chest like that, above the navel, and we walk in a clockwise fashion slowly around the room. And so we're taking our practice from the cushion to the walking. So actually the practice doesn't change. Of course it changes when I'm walking versus sitting, but actually it's not changing. So our state of mind is still in a concentrated, our physical movement may change, but our state of mind should remain the same. Much more difficult to do walking meditation than sitting meditation. So in other words, you keep on counting, or you keep on moving, whatever your practice is. You keep on doing the same object of meditation while you are walking. I'll explain more about that. There's different techniques about walking, but it's usually better done if it's done in person. So for those of you that wish to come to physically to a Zendo, I'll explain that in a little bit more detail for you. We walk for 5 minutes around the room. That's also the ideal time to leave. If you need to leave, that is an appropriate time. Of course, you can always leave at any given moment, but that is sort of an appropriate time to leave. For some people, 3 sits or 4 sits is too long, so they may want to leave. That's fine. Or you go to the bathroom. That's fine. And again, there's a ritual. You wait until you get to the exit, and you sort of go backwards. You do a gesture towards everyone, and you exit. If you go to the bathroom and you come back, people find the slot, if you like, where you were. Notice your neighbors, and wait until they come around again when you're standing at the entry point this time. Do a gesture and slot yourself back into the walking. So the idea is when you have a large number of groups, it just flows. Everything is in harmony because everyone does everything clockwise. Everything functions in harmony. There's never going to be any entanglement. It just works really. It's like a dance. If everyone pays attention, and remember it is all about concentration, then the whole process is like a dance. You go in and you just follow it, and it takes a while to get used to it, and it takes a while to know all these things, and that is perfectly normal. So many people make lots of mistakes, and that's okay. So no one is looking at that, but eventually you get the hang of it, and it becomes a ritual. That's how we do things. Then at the end, the clappers go again at the end of the walking, and then we walk normal pace a little bit faster back to our cushion. The clappers go again, we bow to each other, we turn around, we bow to the seat, and we sit down, and we have another round of sitting. That's how it works. And then that same process happens again, so usually 3 sits. In our Zendo, on the last Thursday, which happens to be tomorrow of the month, there's also a talk, a Dharma talk. Then at 8 o'clock, so there's only 2 sits, then a Dharma talk. But apart from that, it's basically 3 sits, and it's all in silence. Once we get to the Zendo, we try and be silent. Or if you come on Zoom, it's silent. The idea is not. It's afterwards. There's a little bit. There's a little bit of a checking for some people that want to. No one is forced to talk. Some people go straight away. Some people stay a little bit, whether it's on Zoom or in the actual venue, have a cup of tea. Although right now, unfortunately, we can't have a cup of tea due to COVID regulations. They're very strict in this particular venue where we are. But it's just a place to practice with. And by the way, it's very powerful to sit in a group because it motivates and you actually form quite a close bond with. After a while, if you go for a while, you get to know people, even though you don't talk much. If at all, you form a really strong bond with people that we sit with, especially if you go to retreats as well. Any questions on this? All good? Okay. So that's just a little bit of rules in the Zendo. There's some others I'm sure I would have forgotten, but you'll if Zen is your thing and you wish to go, you'll get to know them. You'll get to know them. But more importantly is our home practice. Our home practice is also very important. In fact, I would say is more important or equally important, if you like. So to start off with a home practice, for those that haven't got one, I suggest you start very, very slowly. So in other words, make a decision, as in how often do you want to sit a week. Yeah. You might be ready and say, okay, I'm going to sit every day a little bit. Or you might say, oh, that's really hard for me. I can only really sit on a Friday and I can only sit on a Saturday. It doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is that once we make a decision, is that we try and keep to it. And here the key is that we get past that notion of sitting when we want to sit. If we can sit regardless of whether we want to sit, that is when it starting to have a much bigger effect. So in other words, you might start off with saying, okay, I'm going to have 3 sits a week, and I would suggest that you start off with 5 minutes. So that is something. 5 minutes, that's nothing. There is no excuse not to sit for 5 minutes. But what happens is by giving you that goal, it's make it so that it is really easily achievable. Remember, the hardest thing is getting to the cushion. So you are now setting up a habit of getting to the cushion. So whatever your goal is, really stick to it. If you feel like you can't do it, don't set that goal. Don't be over ambitious. That's the biggest mistake that people make. And then if we get over ambitious about it, then we fall into, oh, I'm not doing it, and then that negative self-image kicks in. We fall into these sorts of patterns. If you're really serious about it, make a commitment to yourself that you feel you can handle. Stick to it. And then once you've stuck to that routine for, say, a month or whatever, however long you give yourself to, then you start increasing. Maybe instead of 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And then from 10 minutes, maybe to 15 minutes. So slowly but surely, just give yourself that time to do it. You might decide to sit on a meditation stool for 2 minutes and then on a chair for another 3 minutes, because you're training your muscles to sit on a meditation stool or cross-legged. That also takes time. Or you might say, I'm going to sit at least every day on my meditation cushion while I'm watching telly until it hurts, and then a little bit more. Just doing that, eventually in 6 months' time, you will be able to sit on a meditation cushion. Just that practice alone will do that. So slowly start getting ready for that sort of, if that is what you want to do, that practice. That's how we recommend it. The other thing is, if you have a dedicated space for your mat, it's another important thing. And that can be you can have your mat under your bed and slide it out when there's meditation time, and your cushion or your chair. Or it can be in a spare bedroom, or wherever you have space. But if it's dedicated and if it's there, then that has an effect as well. Then you're taking away all these excuses not to sit. The other thing is, if you're serious about your meditation, is start introducing some of your own rituals into it. And those rituals may be your dress, for instance. Like in the Zen tradition, we dress usually in black, and we dress conservatively. And this is a sort of a Buddhist thing. In Buddhism generally, if you go to any Buddhist event, you always cover your shoulders and your knees, because you would never go in with a singlet or with shorts. Some people do, and you're not going to get kicked out, of course not. But this is just etiquette. Okay, just to let you know that as well. It's just an etiquette. But more than that, it brings a certain seriousness to the practice. It's like in some traditions they have cleansing rituals before they do it. Like it's not so much in Zen, but certainly in Tibetan Buddhism, sometimes there are certain cleansing rituals before you actually start sitting. And the idea here is that it's it's actually a sacred practice. I know this is something that I assign to it, but it is if you take that practice, it's like putting your shoes. If you put your shoes neatly in front of the Zen, it starts right there. It's like you're setting up an attitude for your practice, and that attitude is really important. That is an intention, and if that is extremely casual, then usually your sit is casual. If you have a certain reverence for the practice and a certain attitude for that translates into the practice itself. So watch that. This is an interesting thing to look at as well. So this is just establishing a routine in your own home. Some people, of course, read the precepts, which I recommend highly, and then that precept practice becomes part of your value system, and that becomes part of it becomes another practice, off the cushion practice, if you like, reading the precepts, and eventually by doing that, you cannot help but engage on somehow, and somehow it comes up during the day, as you engage with life and as you engage with fellow human beings. So there are different routines that people set up for themselves. If you sit the room condition, just on that, what is really important is to have a condition that is conducive to good practice. So if it's too hot or too cold, then that can become a hindrance. Don't make a hindrance where there is no hindrance. In other words, if the light is too bright, turn it down. If it's too hot, open the window or turn the aircon on or whatever. It's make it easy on yourself. So that the first priority is really the practice itself, so that you have a good practice. Sitting length, as I said, starts slowly, but then usually in our tradition, we sit for 25 minutes. Some others sit for 35 minutes, some people sit for an hour, and then have walking meditation. So each tradition you fall into it, whichever tradition you go to, and then people usually adapt to whatever is presented in that particular tradition. In Zen, or not all Zen groups, but in our lineage, is 25 minutes, 5 minutes walking, 25 minutes, 5 minutes walking. So that tends to be the way it works. Then some people can argue, what is better? Is this better? This better? Arguments are always there, free of charge. But that's semantics. Don't need to go into that. Food is another interesting point. With food, especially if you go into retreats, it's good not to be too full. Like if you're really full, if you have a heavy meal, of course you can imagine that it makes it more difficult to sit. It makes it more difficult to practice. So if you go in with a full stomach, just be aware that can contribute to sleepiness and drowsiness and that sort of thing. So practicing, not when you're hungry necessarily, but not necessarily when you're full either. So that's a sort of maybe 80% full, if you like, is maybe not a bad thing. Having a notebook is also handy. And a notebook is handy because sometimes when you sit, a thought comes up that you cannot let go of. Like, oh, it was Mum's birthday. And then all of a sudden that thought will be so powerful, because you don't want to forget that it has an effect on your sit. By writing that down, you let it go because it's there, and afterwards you can pick it up again and then work with that. So that's why a notebook is good. If you do happen to have, or if you think you have a Kensho experience, by the way, then it's also good to write down. Just keep on writing whatever comes to your mind. Don't analyze it. Don't. That's important actually. And then bring that to if you have a teacher, bring that to a teacher. So you just keep on writing as soon as possible, because it fades away very quickly. And whatever comes into your mind, just write it down. Checking for effects is a big one. Checking for effects is where we want to have results when we meditate. And in many ways, certainly from a Zen or Buddhist perspective, that can become an egocentric exercise, where we make it all about me and me wanting to have certain results. Remember, the idea is to let go of self. So checking the effects is actually exactly the opposite. So it's of course, and in one way we cannot help but do that. Otherwise we would not know any process. So there's a fine line here, and it seems like a contradiction, but it's almost, and this is like the goal is not to have a goal. You're sitting with whatever is presenting itself. If you have a goal, there's an I that is driving it somewhere. So in other words, you're no longer you are already manipulating. You're trying to manipulate reality. Reality is there, and we want to access it freely without any goal and see whatever is presenting itself, moment by moment by moment. By saying no to this or that, it hinders it. Now, at this point, some people say, but what about having an object of meditation? An object of meditation, in one way, is a goal in the beginning, because we need an anchor point. So in other words, our goal is to concentrate on an object of meditation, but eventually we even let go of that, and the practice becomes objectless. So it is pure awareness. In the end, it becomes we just go with the flow to such a degree, but we have got the power of concentration at that point, where we just are aware of whatever is arising without any directing at all. That is a much more difficult practice, and that usually follows after we start building up concentration. In other words, it's mooing without saying the moo, or it's counting without counting. We're just concentrating without actually having the need of an object. That comes a bit later. Okay, so that's checking for effect, and that checking for effects has got many implications, like ranking. We want to not only do we want to see results, we want to rank ourselves with others, and where am I and where are other people, and we want to check, we want to achieve things. All of those things, we need to let go of. And that can become a big hindrance if we're starting that. Again, that usually comes up also in the talk with a teacher, if you do have a teacher. We'll talk more about that next week as well. Okay, so these are just some of the rituals. Are there any questions at this stage?
I think I read on your website about, and I don't know if it's the right name, Dokusan, I think.
Yes.
Is that when you say you talk to your teacher
privately?
About?
Yes.
Right.
And that is this is a one-on-one engagement with the teacher. It's called Dokusan. Seeing the teacher alone is actually the literal translation of the word Dokusan. I'll talk about that next week. That's a whole topic next week. So I won't go into too much of it right now. It's an important topic. If that's okay, Shalini. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. No problem. Any other comments about that, rituals? Does everyone have already a practice? Can you show of hands? Does anyone have a meditation practice? You have already, okay. Yeah, and you as well, Caitlin. Yeah. Okay. All right, so you would be familiar with that as well. It's always good to get a refresher on these things, and sometimes and also see how different traditions have different rituals, and they have different practices like that. The other ritual I didn't talk about, we have a little chant to start off the sit in the zendo, and also to finish the sit, followed by prostrations. And these are usually recitations, usually one verse, very short. 4 great vows, things like that. But again, you need to be there to get the flavor of that in a zendo, and they're usually verses from sutras or Zen texts, and it's very short usually. That they do not last longer than 3 minutes, something like that. But that's again, that's part of the ritual. Okay. Yes, Donna.
You talk about writing down words as they come, or writing down those thoughts. Pardon my ignorance, but what then happens at the end? You've written them all down, you've let them go, but you're not analysing, you're not interpreting. So why what's the point of writing these down? I'm just
Okay.
not.
This is only for when you have a powerful experience. So this is not in the normal course of your meditation. So when you have a big aha moment, when you have an insight, and that usually stops you in your tracks when that happens. And that is so powerful that in most cases might not be, but it's powerful enough where you feel like, oh, there's something has happened here, and usually you're speechless. And so then that writing it down is a way of clarifying what's happening, but not. That's why I'm saying just keep on writing. In other words, don't analyze it. Oh, I wonder what this is. Oh, this I should really write this down, or just keep writing. That's the idea, and then and then you talk to a teacher about that experience. Yeah. Is that so? Yeah. So normally you don't do that in the normal course of your meditation. You don't do that. Yeah. Okay. So what I'd like to talk to now, again, this is not something that is that you need to remember, but just a little bit on the different categories of meditation. I talked a little bit about that at the beginning, and how intentions slot into those. So we can have. Let me just get one of my notes here. Meditation. They differ, if you like, in intention, but they may have the same methods. I think I talked about that before. So, for instance, loving kindness meditation there may be a therapeutic intention, or rehabilitation intention, or there may be a spiritual intention, but the actual practice is the same. And it's the same generally with meditation. So when we start sitting and counting, we might have different intentions, like in a corporate world, that we might we might want our employees to concentrate, to have a much better way of concentration, or we might want our employees to deal with anxiety that they are actually getting from the job, and things like high stress jobs, for instance. So there are nowadays lots of meditation groups in the corporate world for meditation, but the intention is different. The intention is to reduce stress, or the intention is to be able to concentrate better, or to be more productive, or to be more social. It's can become a pro-social intention. Okay, so it's important to realize where you're at as well, and where you want to go with meditation. So that's an important reflection that you can have yourself as well. So there are, if you like, there are different categories of meditation that I just like to share with you that came back from. They were already recognized in the year 780 by a Shumitsu Zenji was this guy's name. So that's how long ago they already taught how important intentions are from a Zen perspective. Of course, intention in early Buddhism is very big as well, in the Theravadan tradition. So the first one is called, this is now a Japanese word, Bonpu Zen, not that it matters. And again, you don't have to remember that. But here meditation refers to just sitting with a void of any philosophical or religious character. We just sit for maybe a therapeutic aim. And of course, there is nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong at all with that. In fact, that is quite often the first step. So you can look at meditation in that way as well. That it's like I said before, that like not everyone is ready to do the spiritual path of letting go of self. Not everyone is ready for that. So the first step might be to actually get to know the identity that we have and how we create it, and get to know our if you like, process of the mind, how we function. That might be the first step. So that's very much a goal-oriented. The first Bonpu Zen, this first step is very much goal-oriented. This is why I want to do my meditation, in order to maybe have less anxiety, or in order to have a more balanced life, in order to be happy, more happy rather than sad, in order to maybe address certain functions of myself that I feel are not working quite well. That is perfectly normal, and that's sort of one way of looking at meditation. So it can become a relaxation. I mean, relaxation is another thing. That's a big one. A lot of people go to yoga, and a part of yoga is a relaxation. I mean, we don't relax enough in our society. Relaxation is it's almost in order to do our type of meditation, you almost need to be relaxed already. If you are fully stressed and you go into Zen meditation, it takes a long time for us to get to a stage of relaxation. So relaxation may be that first stage that is absolutely needed. So again, focusing on the other meditation that can happen is focusing on material things. We want to be our goal may be material. And I remember in the New Age movement where people looked at meditating and visualizing things that they wanted, and kept that in their mind all the time as a way of attaining it. If any of you ever been in any sales program, it's almost like a reprogramming of the way you want your life to be. So these are all different types of meditations as well. Another way of looking at it is meditation without insights. Okay, that's one way. The next one, the category, is a non-Buddhist meditation. So here this goes to Christianity, for instance. Also, the Christians meditate. I started meditating in the Christian tradition myself, but here the goal was different too. Here the goal was to be closer to God, if you like. That could be or the goal was to, as a form of prayer. Meditation as a form of prayer. Okay. So again, there's a different context. Okay. In Hinduism and even in Buddhism in some cases, but certainly look at Hinduism right now, we can meditate in order to attain certain mind states and in order to access maybe different levels of awareness that gets us into different realms and goes into cosmology and all these sorts of things. That's another intention. Okay. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Buddhist. There are other traditions that go that meditate as well. So in other words, awakening is not necessarily the goal. Okay. So you can say that there are sort of the first two that I mentioned. You can say one is more secular meditation, for secular purposes. The other one is more religious but non-Buddhist, you can say. So that's a broad category. Then the next one, then we're getting into the Buddhist. I mean, you could of course argue that there are more different perspectives, different meditation styles, but then we're getting into the Buddhist styles of meditation. And even here, there are different approaches. So the goal here now changes. The goal is awakening in the Buddhist tradition, but even in the Buddhist tradition, not everyone meditates. I remember when I went to a Chinese monastery. And I was quite surprised I couldn't find a meditation room. And I said, "Do you meditate?" He said, "Oh, sometimes we're allowed to meditate." We think in the West that all Buddhists meditate. They don't. A lot of Buddhists don't. Buddhism takes on all sorts of different forms. There's a term called populist piety, where people basically believe in a Buddha like Westerners believe in a God, or they pray to Buddha as if it's a God, and that is there are quite a few Buddhists that do that as well, and they believe that they eventually through karma will go into will have good conditions in the next life. So in other words, their whole practice is geared towards morality and geared towards attaining good karma in order to maybe get into another realm, in a future life. That's a lot of the Thai Buddhists, go in that area as well. And so meditation is not necessarily priority. And even in, I would say if you study Buddhism, and you look at most countries, whether it's Japan or whether it is China or whether it is Thailand, the majority of Buddhists, don't meditate. It might be a strange thing to hear, because in the West we automatically think that they do, but that's actually not the case. So meditation has always been, except maybe in the very, very early days at the time of the Buddha, but it has been a small group of people that always meditated in a monastic context. And even in China, in the Chan tradition or the Zen tradition, the other aspect of Buddhism, which was that whole monastic, that whole populist piety, was much, much bigger than the actual meditation part. And even today, when you look at when you look at the West now, we look at Buddhism in the West, you look at what's happening here, most people meditate as far as in order to have a goal, as far as the therapeutic application is, that is really where the growth is in meditation. But there's very, very few people that meditate really with the goal of genuine awakening, to have a genuine awakening experience. There are very, very few people. That's why a lot of Zen groups are fairly small, because it takes a lot of effort, and it's not for everyone. The intention might be there in the beginning, but once you start doing it, it's not easy. And it's again, I don't know why that is. I would say it's a calling. You're either called to do it or you don't. But there's no rhyme or reason. Some people they just do it and others don't. It's a bit of a mystery. But okay, coming back to Buddhist meditation. Here they are basically, if you like, in the Zen tradition, there are basically two schools. One school is called the Rinzai, and the other school is called Soto. In our tradition, both Rinzai and Soto are monastic traditions, but they also teach lay people, more so recently than before. The school that we belong to, or Pathway Zen belongs to, is called Zanbo Zen, Three Treasures Zen, Buddha Dharma Sangha, and that incorporates aspects of both Rinzai and Soto. And what makes Zanbo Zen unique, if you like, is that it is a completely householder lineage. It's a lay lineage. So all the teachers are, if you like, ordinary people working in ordinary life. It's a complete lay lineage. It was started by monastics, but it became a lay lineage. So what's the difference between Rinzai and Soto? The difference is, again, in approach. So the goal is the same. Awakening is always the goal in Buddhism. Awakening is ultimately the goal. Okay, whether it's in this life or another life, but, ultimately the goal is there, but the methods all vary. Okay, so from a Rinzai perspective, Rinzai would say you got to have a point where you actually work towards awakening. You got to see it. So that's where this Kensho comes in. That's a Rinzai perspective. You've got to actually experience it, acknowledge it, own the path, and follow the steps along the way, if you like. From a Soto tradition, Soto would say, you are already it. There's actually nothing to get. You just don't see it. So there's actually, your looking is the aspect of looking for it is hindering you already. So that's a Soto approach, if you like. It's called Shikantaza. That approach this is like that objectless meditation that I was talking about before. It's like that's sort of the difference between one, we have an object of meditation. In other words, we have a process, we have an anchor point, we follow these steps, typical Rinzai, and then this is Rinzai, and then Soto is you're already there, you just sit, and you let the process unfold without any engagement whatsoever. So these are the two traditions. And in our tradition, we basically practice the Soto tradition on the cushion, and the Rinzai tradition through koan work. The koan work comes from that Rinzai tradition. This is the wisdom practice I talked about last week. That is done as a practice as well of the cushion. Okay, that's just gives you a little bit of perspective on meditation in general and the different styles. There's one more thing I want to talk to you about, and that's Makyo. Makyo is when you start getting into meditation in a more serious way, and you start sitting, for longer periods. What can, and some of you may have already experienced that. What can happen is that you start seeing things or experiencing things. Like sometimes you might look at focusing on a point on the wall, and you might see the wall. It appears like as if the wall is moving, or it appears all of a sudden that the room is getting dark. They're called these things are called illusory perceptions that appear, and when they appear, then we let them go. By the way, we let them go. We don't deal with them. We treat them just like we would treat a thought. We keep on counting. We don't engage with it. We just, okay, this is what I'm experiencing now. You keep on coming back to your counting. There's only one good thing about Makyo when that happens, and that is that it's usually a sign that you are getting into much deeper levels of concentration. It doesn't happen to everyone. I would suggest it happens actually to very few people, but I just wanted to mention that so that you're aware of that when that happens, and then usually talk to a teacher as well when that happens. Okay, are there any questions?
Just not a question really, just a observation, and I might be wrong. The Soto tradition, you're already, there's nothing to get. Is that, I don't know if you've heard of Ramana Maharshi?
Yes, yeah, I have, yes.
Is that similar to that?
I'm not sure. I've heard of him, but I haven't heard of, I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you. You'd have to, yeah. It's similar, if you know, it's similar to Dzogchen, in the Tibetan tradition. But it, again, if you get to that stage, then it's discussed. But in our lineage, again, we don't encourage newcomers to go straight into it unless some people, they cannot deal with an object of meditation. It's rare, but it happens.
Yeah.
And then maybe they start off straight away with an objectless style. In other words, just pure awareness, much more difficult because you get distracted so much. You don't know where to go. You have got no anchor.
No.
Where am I going to anchor myself? So you think everything is a thought, and it's not easy because you haven't got sufficient capacity to concentrate, to hold your concentration. Yeah.